Hi guys, I hope you're doing well, and in this video we're going to be discussing about the long run marginal cost. Now first let's see what the long run marginal costs are. Now the long run marginal cost is basically the extra cost that is incurred because of producing one more unit of output. Now, obviously, we have studied marginal cost in the short run as well, in the long run as well, but the basic concept is the same, that the marginal cost is the extra cost that is incurred because of producing one more unit of output. But since we are studying the long run marginal cost, so what we will be discussing or what we will be saying is that now we are assuming that all the factors are variable. Obviously, all the factors are variable in the long run, right? So when we are studying the long run marginal cost, what we are saying is it's the extra cost of basically that is incurred because of producing one more unit of output, assuming all your factors are variable. Also, remember, guys, whenever we are studying the long run cost, we are always assuming that we are using the least cost or the optimum cost method of production for whatever extra output that we are producing. That is whatever extra output that we are producing for this marginal output, we will be using the least cost method of production. Now guys, let's study the shape of the marginal cost curve. But we know that the long run average cost curve is basically a U-shaped curve where the average cost first goes down because of increasing returns to scale. That is caused due to economies of scale, and then it goes up after a period of constant cost, and it goes up because of decreasing returns caused due to diseconomies of scale. Now guys, as far as the marginal cost, the long run marginal cost curve is concerned, basically it's going to be, first of all, the long run marginal cost curve will slope downward, which is obviously due to economies of scale or increasing returns to scale, and then it is going to be moving upwards. But again, the same logic or the same principles that we studied in the short run. So we studied the short run relationship of the marginal cost. Those same principles will be applied over here as well, that the marginal cost curve, that is the long run marginal cost curve, will cut the long run average cost curve at its lowest point. Yeah. So remember that the long run marginal cost curve will intersect the average cost curve at the average cost curve's lowest point. So guys, basically we know that the long run marginal cost curve will basically slope downwards because of increasing returns to scale and economies of scale, and then it will slope upwards because of diseconomies or decreasing returns to scale, and it will intersect the average cost curve at the average cost curve's lowest point. So for instance, if this is your average cost curve, the marginal cost curve will basically intersect or cut your average cost curve on its basically lowest point, right? So having said that, basically what I have done now is that I've divided the declining marginal cost curve and then the increasing marginal cost curve into two parts basically, and then there's a third part to it as well. So basically the part one, if you look at this part one, right, let's break this down and let's see the part one. So in this part one, you can see that the marginal cost curve is basically below the average cost curve. We know that this is the long run average cost curve, this is the marginal cost curve, and for each level of output, the marginal cost curve, the long run marginal cost is basically below the long run average cost curve, right? So remember that whenever the long run marginal cost curve is below the average cost curve, it's basically bringing the average cost curve down. And if you see in this part, basically because of diseconomies of scale, your basically marginal cost is increasing because of decreasing returns to scale, and then that's also pulling the average cost up. The same rules or same logic will apply that we studied in the short run cost curves. Now guys, if we study, like I said, just I've written this down as well, that whenever there will be economies of scale, right? Whenever there will be economies of scale, so what will be happening is that the additional units of output, that is the marginal output, that is whatever extra units that we are producing, they will, guys, add less to cost, right? They will add less to cost than the average. So if the additional units of output are adding less to cost than the average, which means that if the marginal cost is less than the average, basically the marginal cost will be below the average cost curve. And then since the marginal cost is below the average cost, or the marginal units or the extra cost that the business is incurring because of producing those extra units, if those extra costs are less than what the average cost is, it is going to pull the average cost down. So in this region, for this range of output, we can clearly see that the marginal cost curve will lie below the average cost curve, and thus that pulls the average down and as output rises. So I've broken this first part, this part, I've broken this down, and I've broken this down and I've showed it over here, right? So if you can see that in part one, the marginal cost is basically below the average cost, right? So if you're drawing the average cost like this, if this is your average cost, then your long run marginal cost will be below your average cost, and this will clearly indicate that for example, for this output level, your long run marginal cost is less than what the average cost or the cost per unit of producing a single unit is. And since the marginal cost is basically less than the cost per unit or the average cost, it's pulling the average cost down as well. So the average cost curve shape, guys, will be because of the shape of the marginal cost curve, or you can say the marginal cost curve will, derive the shape of the average cost curve. So why are basically marginal costs less than the average cost is simply because of increasing returns to scale, or you can say economies of scale. So because of economies of scale, the firm is experiencing increasing returns to scale, and that is resulting into the marginal cost being less than the average cost, and that's basically pulling the average cost down. So whatever the extra units the business is producing, obviously it's incurring a cost, but that extra cost because of those extra units is less than what the average cost of the business of producing a single unit is. And that's because of economies of scale, right? And that actually pulls the average down then. And then we can see that in part 2 of this curve, the marginal cost is basically, we can see that the marginal cost lies in this range of output. So for this entire range of output, right, the marginal cost, guys, lies above the average cost, and that is basically due to diseconomies of scale. So in part 2, you can see that because of decreasing returns to scale, that is caused due to diseconomies of scale, because the business is not getting any cost advantages. It's in fact because of communication and management issues. Basically what happens is that the additional units that the business is producing, and so for those additional units, the additional cost that the business is incurring is basically more than what the average cost is. So you can see that, for this output, let's say for Q1, at Q1, the marginal cost, the long run marginal cost is more than what the average cost is. So if that's the case, so for each additional so if each additional units are costing more than the average, guys, I'm going to repeat this. So if each additional units the business ends up making, if that's costing more than what the average cost of making the unit is, it's going to pull the average up, right? Remember the same marginal rule the same connection between the marginal and the average that we discussed in the short run cost videos. So the same will apply over here. So if there's decreasing returns to scale or diseconomies of scale, remember that the marginal cost curve will always lie, above the average cost curve, right? Now, guys, and I've written this as well, that if there's diseconomies of scale, additional units of output will basically cost more than what the average is, right? So simply means your long run marginal cost is more than your long run average cost. So for this case, in this case, basically the long run marginal cost curve will lie above the long run average cost curve for that range of output, where the firm is basically experiencing diseconomies of scale, and that's basically pulling the average up as well, right? Understood? Simple. Now, guys, as far as the part 3 of the diagram is concerned, we know that your over here what's happening is that your long run average cost, we know that your long run average cost also faces a period of constant returns, right? So it's also known as constant cost period, where the business is experiencing constant returns to scale. So during the time the business experiences constant returns to scale, we know that the long run average cost is basically horizontal. It's a horizontal straight line. The curve is just flat, right? So it means that the the average cost is neither decreasing nor falling. It's just constant, right? It's the same. So and that same average cost. So if you're increasing our range of output, if you're increasing our output for this scale of output or this range of output, the business is experiencing constant returns to scale, a constant cost. So the average cost is not changing at all. It's just the same. Although we're increasing our output or the range of output, we're scaling up the output, but still the average cost is the same, right? And that's represented because of through a horizontal or the flat average cost line. Now, how would the marginal cost look like if the business is experiencing constant returns to scale or a period of constant cost? So if the average cost is horizontal, how would we make the marginal cost? So guys, in this case, how will we represent this is that basically we are going to be drawing this horizontal line. So this is the same. This is basically this horizontal line where the average cost curve is a flat line. This is the same line drawn over here, right? So guys, over here, as far as this line is concerned, it's telling us that this is the long run average cost that is experienced during a period of constant returns. So if your long run average cost is constant, it's a horizontal line during a period of constant cost. So that will exactly be equal to the long run marginal. So how will your long run marginal cost look like? Your long run marginal cost line would exactly look like how the long run average cost is. So LRAC will basically be equal to your LRMC, right? So you'll basically draw a horizontal straight line for your long run marginal cost, which will exactly be equal to the LRAC line, right? It's going to be the same line, by the way. So guys, For part 3, what I've written is, and I want you to focus on it, and that will basically clear all your concepts. So whenever the business is neither experiencing economies of scale nor diseconomies of scale, right? So then there's neither diseconomies nor economies, which obviously means that that is neither pulling. So something is happening, right? So something is happening that is neither pulling the average down nor the average up. Now, what is happening? What is happening that is neither pulling the average down nor the average up? Obviously something is happening, and the something is that the marginal cost is exactly equal to the average cost. So the LRAC is horizontal, which means that the extra cost, which is obviously the marginal cost that the business is incurring because of producing any additional units, right? So the extra cost the business is incurring because of producing any additional units, that is exactly the same as the average. And because it's the same as the average, it leaves the average unaffected. Then the average neither falls nor rises. That's the thing that you need to know. The average over here, we can see that in part 1, basically, let me show over here, that in part 1, the average is falling because the marginal is falling. In part 2, the marginal is rising, that is also causing the average to rise, since the marginal LRMC is above the LRAC, that's also causing the LRAC to go up as well. It's pulling the average up. But over here, we know that the average cost is constant, right? Because of constant returns to scale. And why is that? It's because of constant returns to scale, each so in that case, the extra cost, that is the marginal cost that the business is incurring because of producing any additional units, is basically the same as the average. So because the marginal cost, guys, is the same as the average, it leaves the average unaffected. So that's something that you need to know. So in that case, how will you represent the long run marginal cost curve? You will represent the marginal cost curve by also horizontal straight line, showing that the reason why your LRAC is basically a horizontal line, the reason why your LRAC is basically a horizontal line is because of the fact, or the reason why the business experiencing constant returns to scale is because of the fact that the average cost is neither going up nor falling, it's horizontal. That's because the additional units that the business, or sorry, the additional cost that the business is incurring because of producing those additional units, that additional cost is exactly equal to what the average is. So it neither increases the average nor reduces the average. So in that case, your LRAC will equal your LRMC, right? So guys, remember that whenever the business will be facing constant returns to scale over that range of output, that is, where the business will face constant cost over that range of output. So what will happen is your marginal cost will also be constant, right? So the business will be facing a constant marginal cost. So if the marginal cost is constant, it's not changing. So that's also resulting into the average cost not changing as well. So since the marginal costs are constant, because in that range the business is facing with constant returns to scale, so in that range of output your marginal cost will be constant, and because your marginal cost will be constant, it will be same as the average, and then it's not changing the average, it's not making the average go up, neither going down. So that is why we basically have this horizontal line where the long run marginal cost is equal to your long run average cost curve in the range where we are facing a constant returns to scale. So yeah, that's it guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you all around in the next video. Until then, take care.